And hello friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television show that profiles local authors, editors, and publishers in our community. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. Our guest on this week's episode of Chapters is author Fran Simone, and Fran Simone is a recently retired professor emeritus from the Graduate College of Marshall University in South Charleston, West Virginia. She received her PhD from Duke University, and she has served on the board of the West Virginia Humanities Council. Her essays have appeared in The Voice and The Quarterly of the National Writing Project, the Charleston Gazette, Writer's Digest, and The Forum, which is a 12-step fellowship magazine. And today we're going to be talking about her memoir called Dark Wine Waters, My Husband of 1,000 Joys and Sorrows. And we welcome Fran Simone here to Chapters today. Fran, nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Tell us a little bit about how this book came about, Dark Wine Waters.
Well, I believe in the power of writing is healing, and after my husband's death, I started to journal a whole lot, and that gave me, some comfort and some dealing with my grief and some insights. And then I decided that I wanted to see if I could do more with that. And so I would say it's been a long journey. This is probably about a 10-year process of starting and stopping. And I did a lot of unwriterly things like start and stop thinking, procrastinate. And also I was working full time. And so it was difficult to have, blocks of time when I could just devote long blocks of time to it. So when I retired 2 years ago, I went back over the manuscript again and decided that I wanted to revise it, refine it, get in the best shape I could, and so that's my book is the result of that.
So when we open up this book, and right when we get into the beginning, we first meet you as a young single mother with a 5-year-old son. And you had a term in there that I really liked, which is called a casualty of divorce from a 10-year marriage. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened, some background on that situation as we open up your memoir and get started?
Yeah, I grew up on Long Island in New York, and I married my high school sweetheart. And we left New York after we married and went to the University of Florida, where he studied for his doctorate. And then from there, he got a job at Duke. And we went up there, and then I went back to school. And we had a son. And I don't know, I guess the spark went out of the marriage. Maybe we married too early. These things happen. So I had just gotten my doctorate, and I needed a job, and I wanted to stay fairly close to Chapel Hill, where we were living at the time, because my husband was a good dad and wanted him to see his son. And it was really hard getting jobs in English departments then. I mean, I really couldn't find anything in Carolina. So I came up here for a year, and that was just all my commitment. I'd never been to West Virginia. And I remember just driving, it was just like 3-lane road turnpike in the old days. And, driving in the mountains, it was just kind of fascinating, a little bit frightening and scary. And then I moved here, and the job turned out to be more than a year. And I met my husband. He had just moved here from Austin, Texas. He had finished law school. And we met, we both moved here in August, and we met in October. So that was my journey with my second husband. We didn't marry for a few years after we met, but so that's what had all happened very quickly.
And his name was Terry, correct? Your
Right,
second husband, his name was Terry. And one of the things that's interesting too about your book is following your move here. You form a friendship with a lady named Marlene. Can you tell us a little about who Marlene is and how you all forged this friendship?
Right. One of the first jobs that I received a call very late before a semester started to take a job at West Virginia Tech in Montgomery. And it was like 2 days before classes started. And while I was there, I met this Afro-American woman from Detroit, and she had moved here with her husband, who was also a lawyer. They were living in a very rural community outside of Beckley. So it was really a big adjustment for both of us. We're big city girls. I grew up near New York. And we met in Montgomery. And one day we were talking, and I was, talking about, the men at the college and, any single men and all of this. And she said, well, my husband is working at Legal Aid, and he is working with this guy who just moved here from Texas, and he seems kind of like a nice guy. And I said, well, give me his phone number. I mean, it was something that I'm really surprised I even asked. It seemed like a bold move, give me his phone number. But she did, and I called him. And that's the first chapter of the book, is meeting him for the first time. Yeah.
So what was it about Terry that drew you to him? Because so much of what we read about in Dark Wine Waters is your relationship with him. What is it about him that caught your attention really from the first time you sort of laid eyes on him or really met him? What was it about him that sort of ignited that spark for you?
Well, he was he was a real Southern gentleman. He was very sweet and very charming and very funny and, very kind of matter-of-fact and laid back. And also new to the area too, so he didn't, know a lot of people. But he did move here because he was friends with some people from Texas who came with that Back to the Land group. And so he had a community of friends who he knew they all lived out in Putnam County. So he came here with a community of friends that he knew. I came, completely alone, but we... So we kind of gravitated one another because I had met friends at the college at Tech, and we gradually all became friends at the same time. But he was just charming and funny, and I don't know, he's just easy to be with.
And one of the things that happens as the book unfolds is we learn a little bit more about Terry and his drinking problem. And you describe in the book, I think, so well, when you first meet, there's a situation where there was a six-pack of beer involved, and you started having these moments where you thought, he does like to drink quite a bit. When was it, as you guys really became sort of a serious couple, that you really became alarmed that maybe his casual drinking was more of a serious problem than you originally thought?
Well, some of the friends that I met here had been to college with him and said he was a very heavy drinker in college, and that was something that I learned after I met him and we fell in love. And also, this was in the 70s, and a lot of people, I don't know, maybe it's changed today, but a lot of people were drinking a lot in those days, or at least the people that we were kind of palling around with. So it wasn't something that was out of the ordinary, I would say. And it probably wasn't until, in the book I describe early and middle and late stages of alcoholism, and I would say it probably wasn't until the middle stage that I began to realize that this was abnormal. This was something that was creating a problem in our relationship. But it took a long, long time. He was also a binge drinker, so there were many periods where he just didn't appear to be intoxicated. I mean, he just functioned normally. Now, I don't know if there was just a low level of drinking going on that, he could manage, but every once in a while it would get out of control in terms of he was never a mean or nasty drunk. He just would kind of disappear. I mean, not physically disappear, just emotionally disappear,
What were some of the things that you were feeling during that time, and what were some of the things that you tried to do during those moments when, as you said, he would disappear and you knew the drinking was becoming more problematic? What kind of position did that put you in as his wife, and did you ever have those moments where you approached it or talked to him about it, and if so, what was his reaction to the topic being addressed?
Right. Well, first of all, there was a lot of confusion until I realized that it was beginning to interfere in the relationship. And one of two things would happen, both of which were negative ways to behave. But I should say that when you're naive about this situation, you really don't know how to behave. So I behaved in, I guess, negative ways, and a lot of what the book is about, is how I handled things until I learned how to handle them better. But I would either sit down and say, we have to have a talk afterwards, and he would always try to avoid that. Or, so that wasn't good. And he would always promise to, you know, he realized he had drank too much, he would, you know, cut back, that kind of thing. And he did have very severe allergies, so sometimes it was hard to figure out, you know, because he would use the excuse of an allergy pill, you know. So sometimes it was really hard to figure out, you know, what was the booze and what was the pill. The other thing is, negative thing I did was just give him the silent treatment. So, you know, we'd be in our house for 2-3 days, and nobody would talk, you know, and that was very uncomfortable, and oftentimes I would be the one to break the silence because it just would become so uncomfortable for me. And sometimes I would really get angry and yell, but that didn't happen too often.
And later on, and one of the things that you touch on so poignantly in your memoir is that at the age of 48, Terry committed suicide. And what was that like? And I don't mean to ask that tongue in cheek,
right.
but what was that like? And did you ever imagine in those days, as you were saying, when you were, you know, discussing this or having the silent treatment or the arguments or whatever, did you ever think it would get to that point where he would do something like that? What was that like for you in terms of what happened after he committed suicide?
Well, maybe I'm, again, naive or a Pollyanna, but I always believed he would get well. I always believed he would get well. And after he did go into treatment, he went to the 30-day program, unfortunately relapsed fairly quickly after that. What happened toward the end, and I wasn't even aware of it until later on, is he started to have what people call blackouts. So he would be functioning like you and I would be talking, but wouldn't remember. So I remember one time we were out to dinner and we were in South Charleston, which is a tiny little town, and couldn't find the car. I mean, if you can't find the car in downtown South Charleston, you're in trouble. And just, you know, he just couldn't remember. He had blacked out. So the suicide never even crossed my mind. It was just totally out of nowhere. I never even suspected, although in retrospect, looking back, he was in very, very bad shape toward the end. He was in very bad shape. And maybe I was still in denial and not, you know, you don't want to believe what you don't want to believe. You know, I can't say, but the suicide was, you know, and I think there also was a lot of depression going on too. Obviously, alcohol is a depressant, and then I think he was prone to depression anyway.
And one thing that sort of carried over from that experience is you also have a son who's had an addiction problem as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? And you eventually got yourself into sort of a 12-step program for families. Can you talk about your son and his situation and how you got to the point where it was time to get yourself into this 12-step program for families?
When my husband was in treatment, a 12-step program was recommended, and I kind of flirted with it, but I really didn't take. I didn't think I needed something like that. I could manage things myself. I guess it was pretty arrogant at the time, you know. So it wasn't after, a while after I discovered that my son also had a problem, and and it was just when he agreed finally to go into treatment that I felt that I needed to get some help myself, because I was doing all the wrong things with him in terms of codependent and enabling, and I write about that in the book. I think in some ways it's harder for a parent than maybe for a spouse. I mean, maybe harder isn't exactly the word, maybe different is a better word. Because as a parent, you know, your DNA is to protect your children and to help your children. But in helping my son, quote, helping, I was really kind of harming him because I was allowing, you know, the addiction to continue with money, with a place to live, you know, all of these kinds of things. So after he went into treatment, and again, I had gone down for a family weekend, and it was recommended, and then I thought, yeah, I was in pretty bad shape at that time, and I knew I needed some help how to cope with whether he was going to be well or not. I needed some help.
What were some of the things that you learned, or what are some of the things that helped you the most in being involved in that 12-step program? Because we probably have some viewers, and most of us do, those watching and myself, you know, we all know of someone, we're related to someone, we're married to someone, we have someone who's struggling with some kind of a substance abuse problem. It's just unfortunately where we are in society today. So how did being in that program, what are some of the things that you really took away from that helped you through this process?
I should say that I just went to a service at my church on Sunday where a lovely couple lost their 32-year-old son to addiction, which is so sad. One of the first things I learned there that I just hung on to for a long time is what's called the 3 C's. And it's you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And that was very, very helpful because as a parent, I felt like I had done something wrong in raising my son. You know, was it the divorce? Was it that his stepfather was an alcoholic, although my son had a great relationship with both his father and his stepfather. You know, what did I do to cause this? And hearing that I didn't cause it was a huge relief for me. The other one was I can't cure it until someone is ready to get help and to do what needs to be done in order to get into recovery. No matter what anyone says or does, you know, I mean, you can be helpful, you can encourage them, that kind of thing, but until they're ready, it just won't take, you know. And the third thing, it can't control it, was probably the most important to me because I was trying to control everything. I was trying to orchestrate everything in his life so that the next bad thing wouldn't happen. And of course the next bad thing kept happening and happening because I would always step in to fix the problem, you know, with money, with paying bills, with going and getting him, with letting him live in my home, you know, all of those kinds of things that we do. And I find out in the program that the issue of control and enabling and denial come up again and again and again and again, and it's very, very hard, I have found, in my experience, for parents to let go, because it's almost like an unnatural act, you know.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So those are the things, and you know, there's a lot of slogans and the steps and, you know, all of those things in the program, which if you are willing to put the time and energy into truly immersing yourself, it can be very helpful. But I should say to you that it's not for everyone. Mm-hmm. It worked for me, but there are other avenues for recovery for both people with alcoholism and addiction and also for their loved ones. So my message would be find some recovery program to help you get through this experience with your loved one. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 12-step work for me.
I wanted to ask you, too, about your thoughts on why it seems like our society today, and if you had any thoughts or perspective on this, having dealt with this twice in your family, why we have so many people addicted to substances today. I mean, I can remember growing up and you know, you had, you know, a certain niche or a certain clique of people that you knew, that you went to school with, or you knew their parents or whatever had substance abuse problems. But it just seems like anymore it's so rampant and widespread. If it's alcohol or it's drugs or it's, it's pain pills, it's just all kinds of different things. Why does it seem like that is so prevalent today, and especially in this region? Why this region struggles so much with substance abuse addiction? Do you have any thoughts on why you think that is?
One thing I read is almost 43% of the population is affected. It's a huge number. I think that, well, here in West Virginia, what I read is that because of the heavy industry that we have, a lot of people who get injured go on to painkillers and either can't get off of it, or then I read that from the painkillers, then people might switch to heroin because it's a lot cheaper and available. So I think availability is one thing. I think maybe the family, I mean, I'm not blaming families, but perhaps the family structure isn't as cohesive as it used to be. I know I used to work with teachers a lot, and one of the things they're telling me is in some of the schools they're working, there's kind of a lack of respect for authority. Again, it's, I'm just speculating. I mean, I don't know. But it is our biggest #1 public health issue in the United States is alcohol and drug abuse. And one of the things I know now is people in recovery are coming forward, and that was one of the impetus for writing the book, because in the end I do recover and thrive and have a good life, and I wanted people to know that even though these tragedies can happen in your life, you can get beyond them. So.
Let me ask you a bit about your title, Dark Wine Waters. Where did that title come from? Was that something you came up with, or was that suggested to you by your publisher?
No, this is a great question. When I was revising, I worked with a writer in Charleston whose work I really admired, and I said to her, I don't have a thread for the book. I don't know what that thread will be. And we would talk informally, while we were working together. And she said, because I grew up on Long Island, so I love the ocean, I love the water. She said, when you talk about water, you always light up. Why don't you fool around with chapter headings having to do with water? And that gave me the thread, because if you've read the book, there's a lot of water imagery.
Yes.
And that gave me the thread to weave through the book. And I think it helped to sell the book, I really do. And I think it's an intriguing title.
It is. It's one that if you see that on the bookshelf, you're immediately drawn to it, because you wonder, what's the connection here? Dark Wine Waters. How does this all work? But
Right.
it is a great title for your collection. You mentioned too, Fran, that it took you about 10 years to really put all this together into a book and get it ready. What was your writing process like? When you decided you were going to do this, did you work a little bit each day? Did you work feverishly for a couple of months and then take a couple of months off? Because I know you're dealing with a lot of personal, emotional circumstances here. You do it very poignantly and very well. But what was that like? What was your process like in putting all this together?
Well, I think there was a lot of interruptions when my son was ill. So, there was times when I just simply had to put it aside. But after I retired, I was pretty steady at it. I just set myself a schedule, not every day, but a few hours a day, maybe 3 days a week, something like that. I did set a schedule. And then when I started to work with the gal, my writer friend Lori, we really worked very steadily on it, back and forth email and that kind of thing. And then I had a wonderful editor at Central Recovery Press who I think we worked very well together. And I didn't have to do a lot of major editing once I had sent the manuscript to them. I should say it was very hard to get an agent. I did not find an agent, but I was at the library one day and I found a book from this press. I'd never heard of this press. And then I sent the query letter, and then it all happened within a few months. I'm just very, very grateful to have found such a good publisher and supporter for me.
That's great. That's terrific. In our final moments with you today, Fran, if someone would like to get in contact with you, either to get a copy of Dark Wine Waters, to talk to you about the content in Dark Wine Waters, or maybe reach out to you as someone who has had family members go through alcohol abuse, how can they get in contact with you? How can they get a copy of your book?
Well, they can order it from the press. They can also order it from Amazon. And also, I have a website on Central Recovery Press, and if they go to Central Recovery Press and plug in Dark Wine Waters, my website will be there. And I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook page through the press, so I think those would probably be the best ways to get in touch with me.
Great. Well, Fran Simone, author of Dark Wine Waters, My Husband of 1,000 Joys and Sorrows, thank you for being on Chapters. And if we have anybody in our audience who is dealing with a loved one who's going through a substance abuse issue, alcohol or something else, I certainly would encourage them to read this book. Very poignant and some wonderful examples and wonderful advice for people going through this. And we appreciate you coming on Chapters and sharing your personal stories with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
And we also want to take a moment to say thanks to the staff and management at Empire Books and News here at Pullman Square in Huntington for providing our studio taping space today. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News to satisfy whatever your reading needs might be, and also pick up a copy of Dark Wine Waters while you're down here from author Fran Simone. But we also want to point out that Empire Books has the largest selection of magazines in the tri-state as well. So if you're not a book reader and you like magazines, Empire Books is the place to be. So come down, visit Empire Books and News, talk to Charlotte and her staff, and let them get you taken care of with all of your reading needs. And if you have a question, comment, or suggestion about this Chapters program or any Chapters program that you've seen here on Armstrong Cable, we certainly want to hear from you. You can send us an email to the address right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. We certainly appreciate all the comments and feedback that we do get to that email address. And we also want to remind you that if you'd like to watch a previous Chapters program from our 2 seasons to date of shows that we have aired here on Armstrong Cable through the Chapters program, you can access that through the Armstrong One Wire YouTube page. And that address will also appear at the bottom of the screen here. It's www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire, all one word. Just look for the Chapters tab and you can find all the episodes of Chapters that we have done, over 9 hours of author, publisher, and editor interviews from publishers, editors, and authors from all around the tri-state region in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. So we encourage you to check that out. If there's somebody you want to watch again or an episode maybe that you've missed, you can check that out at the Armstrong One Wire's page on YouTube. So we encourage you to check that out as well. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters. Please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.